Čau visiem. Tiecīgi varam sākt. It's a pleasure to have you. I prepared. I read quite a bit of what you've written about different kinds of stuff. So the obvious first question, the opener, is how did you enjoy the show today? What's new? Is there anything that surprised you today?
I enjoyed it very much. I thought it was a good show. I thought the selection of speakers fitted together very well. So I think the topics built on each other. And in that sense, it's good not to have been too much surprised because I think it actually made perfect sense. Your presentation about branding in general and where you see in the way that branding generally develops more towards content and identity and substance as opposed to purely advertising and spending lots of money on budget. I think you counter-argued for that development, which I think is absolutely right. And it's particularly relevant to say that in the context of nation branding or city branding. And then looking at Aaron and Nick in terms of how you can use online tools in order to build engagement and all that. So I think it fitted perfectly together. So I wouldn't say I was hugely surprised. I think the people that put the program together did a great job.
You're a specialist in place branding, and there's a lot of advertising people who are generalists. Basically, they advertise everything, and they, at the same time, know nothing as far as deep as you do about place branding. So I'm sure you have encountered working with these kinds of people. So the question is, what's your impression? What are the most common mistakes that take place when a typical ad agency that hasn't done city branding or place branding before takes up a project and tells client, sure, we can do that. No problem. We will handle it. Tourists will be coming. The brand image will rise. What are the problems? What are the red flags that you see in these kinds of situations?
That's a very good question. And I would say if a client a national government or even a tourism agency comes to me and says, we want to do nation branding through advertising, I will say, that's not my job, so please don't hire me. Because actually I don't believe in advertising at all. So I think it's completely the wrong thing to do when we're talking about nation branding. Of course, tourism marketing is something completely different. So it's actually quite a complicated realm, okay? So both in practice and even in academia, you will see that place marketing or national marketing or city marketing versus place branding or nation branding or city branding are used interchangeably, as though they are almost synonymous, right? Which I think is the biggest mistake. And I think they're actually completely different things. Of course, they should be aligned and they have very closely linked, but we should see them as different subjects. So on the one hand, there's branding, which I see really as supply-driven. It's really looking at who are we as a people, as Latvians, where did we come from as a country, what is our history, what are we good at, what is our unique capabilities. And I'm not talking about economic activities, but really about the underlying essence of who you are. So let me use an example. If you think, we've of course studied this, and when people think about Germany, they think about good quality products and cars and consumer electronics. Now the reason why Germans are so good at all of these and why they're recognized for it is, of course, they produce them, but the underlying essence of who they are is the idea of Gründlichkeit. I don't know, I guess the Latvians are relatively good at in their German or not. I'm not sure, but Gründlichkeit basically means doing things thoroughly, right? Which defines the essence of a German. When they decide to do something, they do it well. Like, when Holland is not joining the World Cup soccer next summer, but usually we do. And we always say, oh, Germany's participating. Well, there's no point going because they will win it anyway. Because when they do something, this is the idea of Gründlichkeit. So it's this looking for this, when you're talking about nation brand, you're looking for this underlying current, if you like, identity. And then on the other hand, we have marketing, right? And marketing, of course, as you are very well aware, and other people mentioned this today as well, is really about selling a product or a service to a target market. Now, the problem is when you're talking about nations or cities, we've got multiple products. You're not selling your city, you're not selling your country, I hope. Anyway, anybody has any ideas to sell it back to the Russians maybe or something? Bad idea. So you're not selling your country, but you're selling products and services that are created in this country, which is tourism, investment promotions, investment opportunities, exports, country of origin, the things I mentioned before. So they are really very different products and very different services which target very different markets. So when you're talking about this marketing, then of course advertising to the right target audience is fine. Right? It makes complete sense if you have identified your specific tourist market that you go and maybe spend money if you need to, maybe you don't, maybe if you've got an interesting story that people automatically share in social media, but if you do need to advertise, fine, because you're actually legitimately selling a product to a target market that you know might be interested. You can't do all of that. Well, the problem is when you see that as branding, and I'll finish there, when you see that as branding, and I've seen this happening in many destinations, is when you allow the DMO, the Destination Management Organization, to take control of that nation brand, and they think that they are in charge of building the overall image of the country, what they then start doing, and many countries have done this, they start to spend massive advertising budgets to have a national campaign on CNN and BBC World, because everybody, the argument is that like in the commercial industry, everybody needs to have seen the ad of our wonderful country. And it's actually counterproductive because it doesn't work, because you cannot build, and it's actually not a good idea, to build your national image only on tourism. It needs to be much, much more than that. And second, by doing that, they're spending all their money on mass advertising and they're not actually doing what they're supposed to doing, i.e. selling a product to a target market. So those are a couple of issues I see with the link between advertising, branding, and marketing. And we need to be clear about where advertising works and where it doesn't.
I see a risk in what you're saying, in a sense that your approach focuses on the roots of a country, to be really true to oneself. And I imagine it would be quite a lengthy and fruitful discussion to discuss the Latvian roots. I mean, we could get along with the decision makers very well. We could discuss the origins of Latvia, different aspects of our culture, different kinds of national products that we can use, and etc. But the problem is that we care a lot about it. Latvians care a lot about Latvians and Latvian culture. But it might be that Germans don't care that much about our heritage. It might be that they don't, that the Swedish people don't care that much about Latvian products, or that the culture perhaps is not that relevant, and the cultural heritage not that relevant in the modern world. So how do you mitigate those risks that a country might devise a very strong place branding strategy around its history, around its culture, around its roots, and they launch it and they work on it, but it turns out that nobody cares, that it just seems very marginal. Are there risks like that?
Yes and no. I think the risk is in the idea that you then have to promote that or use propaganda in order to get people to notice, right? And this is again, I think, so this is where I see advertising come in. And I don't think that that's what you need to do. What you need to do is to implement that strategy through creating new stuff. And this is what my speech was about, doing imaginative things. You know, the Germans don't care about this small little region next to the city of Eindhoven where Van Gogh was born. Who cares? But by building a cycle path, linking today and something unique, something imaginative, something worth seeing to the identity of the place makes it an interesting story. And of course, that one incident is not going to make that place famous. But if you come up like every month or every year, if you constantly invent these fun or relevant initiatives, it will seep through. People will start to notice it. And of course, it's not so difficult to do imaginative stuff. The difficult part is to linking it back to who you are. And you have to do the latter. You have to link it back to who you are consistently in order to create the brand so that it sticks in people's minds. So it's not easy. I fully agree with you. This is this is the challenge that I fight every day as a place branding scholar and consultant, because advertising agencies will tell governments that it's not very difficult. You just need to come up with a visual identity, a logo and a slogan, and spend massive amounts of money on advertising and everything will be fine. So it's easy, it's no big deal.
Sounds like a plan.
And I would say exactly the opposite,
yes.
right? It doesn't have to cost you a lot of money, but it's very, very, very difficult. Because first of all, it's controversial. You have to convince your population that you've actually found something in who you are and your identity that makes sense for everybody. And of course, you have opposition and you have people that are maybe not going to like it as much. And then you need to bring in stakeholders, businesses, civil society, clubs, the people, Latvians, society in general, to come up with initiatives, enthuse them, get them to come up with ideas, etc., etc. So it's difficult.
That was my next question. You have worked a lot with millions of stakeholders, thousands, hundreds perhaps, and how do you manage them in a way that they get along in the end? Basically, I have been in several country branding, city branding discussions, and it's a very heated topic typically in the room. Everyone wants to highlight another aspect that is, from his or her perspective, the main one. And there's so much compromise because politics is also involved. How do you deal with that? How do you find the essence for a place?
This is a very good point, and this is always the case. And I think part of the problem is that the discussion is again limited to the level of product marketing. Right? So all these stakeholders, of course, they are all in a certain industry. They've all got a product or a service to sell. So they think my product, my industry needs to be part of the brand. And if you maintain the discussion only at the level of unique selling points or your successful industries, then you're going to end up nowhere. Actually, you're going to end up where most places do, which is, I didn't show this slide today, but I've got in out of my presentation, I've got this wonderful slides of all colorful logos. It's about 40 logos of various countries and cities, and they're all very, very colorful. And one of the reasons, I reckon, is because of that. Everybody says, oh, we've got so much to offer, and we've got all these different products and services and industries. So why not make it colorful as reflective of the fact that we have everything? Well, you're a country. If you didn't have everything, people wouldn't be living here. So by definition, places have so much to offer, and it becomes colorful. So the problem is you have to dig deeper. You have to go a level deeper into an underlying current that people could feel part of. It's a horrible word, but it's really about this identity of the national identity.
There was a debate half an hour ago, and one thing was mentioned that sports does not sell well in terms of place branding, in terms of tourism facilitation. Perhaps many things don't sell that well, but how do you think from your perspective, which ones do? You mentioned that we shouldn't focus on the product too much, but how do you see it? Which categories are the ones to dig into, to find the things to promote, the things to highlight, the things to also create experiences around? If it's not products, what is it then?
Okay, I can't answer that for Latvia because I haven't studied it, but what we normally do at the beginning of a nation branding or city branding projects is what we usually have is what we call identity groups. So it's basically like focus groups sessions, but with people that are knowledgeable about the identity. So we're talking to historians, that write books about the country, or museum curators, or architects, or artists, or journalists, people that from the country or the city, of course, that we're working at, people that are knowledgeable about the essence of the place, and usually we come up with some underlying aspects. So it's hard to give examples because you might not be familiar with them, but we're working, for instance, a good example that you might have heard of is the region of Flanders, which is the Dutch-speaking north part of the country of Belgium, and they've come up with this idea of cutting-edge craftsmanship, right? So basically their whole region branding, because of course it's not a nation state, Belgium is the nation state, but this idea of international engagement is organized at regional level. So there's a Flemish minister for tourism, a Flemish minister for investment. I won't bore you with the politics. And so they've come up with this regional brand. They want to position themselves internationally as the country of cutting-edge craftsmanship. So that means that, you know, they've got, and this of course links back to what everybody already knows, like chocolate and beer and that kind of stuff, which is, they don't have the massive brands. They're not the Carlsbergs and the Heinekens of this world, but they've got good quality, home brewed, if you like, beers. In the food industry, they don't have big global chains, but they have really good high quality cuisine. So they focus on these smaller scale, authentic, high quality craftsmanship as opposed to positioning themselves as a global power in all these industries. So and I'm still a firm believer that every city, every region, every country has this kind of underlying essence of what the place is about.
Okay, I'll not torture you about Latvia, but there's one thing I want to know. Does bad reputation sometimes, can a bad reputation do good for a country? In a sense that can there be an anti-trend that people go to a place simply because it's terrible, or it's dangerous, or it's poor, or it's notorious for some reason? Do you see an anti-trend that people are seeking these not so polished experiences, the not so perfect places, and sometimes the weaknesses can actually be the strengths of a place?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you might, I don't know if you're referring to that, but we have the city of Charleroi in Belgium, which is an old industrial town, and this really has struggled for many years, and this is actually what's happening there. So it's got such a bad reputation in northwestern Europe that tourists will go there, but then you're limiting yourself very much to tourism, right? So for a tourist, I'm sure there's a niche of travelers that will do that, but when you're talking investment promotion, for people to buy a house there, to migrate there, to get a job there, to go and study there, to buy products from there, I think this is really problematic, right? So sure, you know, from a tourism perspective, there might be an opportunity, but I think in many other areas you would be struggling. I don't think it's good for an economy, particularly for its diversification. If you have, so you need to work on that reputation. The good thing is, of course, that if you've got such a strong negative reputation, at least you've got name awareness. So if you can find clever ways of twisting that, of turning that around, then you might have an opportunity. And the example that comes to mind is, which I've used in the past and I use with students, is Wales in the UK, which has a negative reputation, particularly in the rest of the UK, because people perceive it as very remote, as a cultural desert. It's always raining, lots of sheep. So, you know, that's about it. And in the various, both in their investment promotion campaigns and in their tourism campaigns, they actually used those negative stereotypes and twisted them around. So they said, like, how would you like your mud, right? And then you would see a mountain biker going through the mud. You would see children playing with mud. You would see mud therapy, like in a wellness center. So they actually, it's quite clever because they know that everybody, when they think of Wales, they think of rain. And so you use the existing association and you twist it. So it does actually allow for opportunities, as opposed to when you have no awareness at all. You need to build it from scratch, which arguably might be more difficult. It really depends on the situation and the location. But it's not necessarily a lost case. Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up the official part of today, and thanks for the attention, maybe there's one last piece of advice or one last warning you want to tell to the people today.
Besides my presentation. Don't think that, so because it's gone now, the wonderful magnet, that's here, isn't it? Magnetic Latvia. So you've got the logo, often misunderstood as the brand, right? What happens to me at these kind of conferences, the minister or some official comes and has this logo pin and they put it on my jacket and they say, now you're branded. And then I would say, am I, right? this is, you know very well that this is, of course, a very common mistake. The fact that you have a logo, of course, doesn't mean that you have a brand. The logo only becomes a brand when people recognize it and people start linking positive associations to it. Then it becomes a brand. When it represents brand equity, right? Then it becomes a brand. A logo is just a logo, it's just a trademark. So you've got that, so don't think that's the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story. You need to load that brand, you need to explain to people what this country is about. And by the way, and this is another issue when we're talking about logos and slogans and advertising campaigns, one of the reasons why it has very, very limited effect when we're talking about places is because people, of course, interact with places in all kinds of ways, right? When you're buying I don't know, a vacuum cleaner, or whatever, a washing machine, a Miele, the German brand, I don't know if you get it here, people say is the best brand. You'll buy that because you recognize the logo and you know that's the best washing machine, so I'll just buy it. You're not going to brag about it, you're not going to share it with your friend. Look, I've bought a new Miele, and they're boring, right? So these commercial brands are not being talked about apart from in the shop and on the advertising. And you know, you need a new washing machine, you make a quick decision, that's the best brand, let's just buy it. Places don't function like that at all, of course. You know, when people make decisions about moving to a place or studying there or investing, buying a house there, whatever, those are big, big, big decisions. So people don't make snap decisions, so the logo and the campaign doesn't really matter because people will conjure up all existing knowledge that they have about places, and they actually go and actively search for information, and they will use their friends and relatives. And places are constant, as you know, in social media. You know, tourism is not. It's not for nothing that tourism is the biggest sector, if you like, in social media. It's the thing that people talk about most because people love to share their experiences. So the amount of impact that you can have with your logo and your slogan and your campaign is very, very tiny compared to what's in the news, what people share on Facebook, etc., etc. So don't think that that is the end of it. That's the beginning of it. Now it becomes the important part is how do you position yourself and how are you going to do great stuff that is going to build onto that positioning. And to finish that off, I love the example of the helmet. So now we've got the logo on the helmet. Great. Don't get me wrong. You know, it's fine. It's all good. Right? There's nothing wrong with having a visual identity and using it. It looks professional. It might create some recognition. And it's particularly important internally for you guys to rally behind. But the point was made, now it's on the helmet and people will see it. The problem is when you see the ranking of the medals, right? This is, I assume it's the Winter Olympics that we're talking about. When you see the ranking of the number of medals won, it will just say Latvia, right? It's not going to show your logo. And we had this similar discussion just now working for the Dutch government, and they're always on 2 feet. One is the Netherlands or Holland, and in some languages it's Holland, and some languages it's the Netherlands. And years ago they made this decision, let's just always use Holland. Bad idea, because whenever you're participating in the World Cup soccer or in the Olympics, it will just say the Netherlands, which is the official name. So imagine we could all, as countries, decide what should go on the listing. We would go completely mad, because it would say, surprising Singapore, incredible India, magnetic Latvia, etc., etc. You know, and then it will change every year, because all these things change year on year. So we would go completely crazy, I think. Point is, you know, don't give it too much. It's great that you have it, it's good. Don't give it too much attention. Focus on how you're going to position yourself and build that for the future.
Thanks a lot. These are amazing pieces of advice, and it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for coming, and thank you for listening.
Kristaps Siliņš and Robert Govers. By the way, yes, maybe in official standings, no one will say magnetic Latvia. But every single time someone will ask you, where are you from? You will say, I am from magnetic Latvia. And off you go. Then you will have to explain what. And that's the best question you can get in the marketing. Or sometimes it's WTF.